Hello, Policy 782. Today I will be covering how to utilize this website as well as how to run R Studio and the basics of R. Now, what you'll see here is that this is a public website that I created, and I will provide you the link. And each week for the TA sessions, I will include a new folder, and this folder will have the following contents. So right now there's only one TA session, but this will grow as the semester goes on. So for this TA intro one, there are two important points that will be consistent across all folders. And that is there will be a code file and a notes file. And generally speaking, there'll also probably be some other data. But these code and notes will be available in every single folder. Now today's notes can just be viewed here. So let's click on that. And it will have all of the material and the code for today's session. But before I jump into these session notes, I want to briefly touch on how you can run R Studio on your computer. Now, one of the options I highly recommend is to use R Studio Cloud. If you already have R Studio on your computer and it works, that's great too. But for the beginners, I think this is a great way to focus on the code rather than setting up R Studio, which can be a little tricky. So I've already created a new project, and you can do this by just clicking the new project here. And that project will launch and look like this. And for the videos, I want to show you both the notes on the left side as well as R Studio on the right side. So this is how I will generally go over our sessions. So the notes will just go over very briefly before I get into how it is you can use R Studio Cloud here. So why do we work with data in R? Well, there's a couple of advantages of R, and I think the professor had mentioned it in the first session. But first and foremost, R is free, which makes it actually a pretty good software to do open source work, because not everybody needs to obviously pay for it, which can inhibit some work if you're working with other statistical software. I also like it because I think it can easily manipulate data, which is what we'll cover today. But really, the possibilities with R are pretty endless. You can download data, visualize data, build models, all that fancy stuff. So I will be using a new word today that many of you probably will be unfamiliar with, and that is a data frame. A data frame is essentially just an Excel sheet. You can think of it as an Excel sheet. In many cases, the rows are observations, people or households, as they will be for our development economics data. And our columns are often other variables like GDP and life expectancy. Sorry, that's very basic, but I just wanted to touch on that first. I'll be following up with that in a second. What are the applications I can use to run R? As I just mentioned, R Studio Cloud is recommended. Many of the students I have taught in the past sometimes get a little frustrated by running it on their computer because there can be kind of more bugs. And you can register for R Studio for free by clicking on this link here. As I said, you can also run it on your computer, and the link to the free download is here. And if you're really ambitious and you're wondering how it is that I make these tutorials on the left side here, you can actually run R in this. It's called the Jupyter Notebook, but you don't need to know how to do that. So let's just briefly cover how to use R Studio in R Studio Cloud. As I just, again, I'm kind of repeating myself, but let's just do it. Again, just to be clear, you can click on New Project and then click on the New Project here, and then it will launch what you see here on my right-hand side. So what you're looking at on the right-hand side is just the basic R Studio. You might be wondering what's the difference between R and R Studio, And just to scroll back up, R is actually a statistical programming language, and RStudio is just one of the many things you can use to run R programming language. We like using RStudio just because it's the easiest to use, but you can also use it in these tutorials that I write, which is Jupyter Notebook. But that might be a little bit confusing, but the takeaway I think you should know is that R is the programming language and the RStudio Cloud is this nice fancy application that we have here. So when you launch RStudio, it will look like this here on the right side. And what you're going to first want to do is always click the button at the top right here to launch where you will be writing your code. So right here you can write your code, but I don't suggest it because it's harder to save. And if you click this button here, you will have a code, RStudio code, so an R code file that is automatically launched, and then you can write code up here. Okay, so when you run code, what happens? So I will actually show you that here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this code here from the left side and paste that in and make notes too. So when you want to run code, as I show here, you put it up in the top left side, and you can either run the code in two different ways. So you can click on the run button, or if you are on a Mac, you can do command return. And there's also a shortcut for Windows, but I actually will actually post that later because I don't know that off the top of my head. So that's how to run the code. And you'll notice something interesting. The code actually didn't run up here on the left. It ran down here on the bottom left. And so that is exactly how RStudio works. You will write the code on the top left and the output will be on the bottom left. Now, you can also not only write code in this R file up here, you can also write comments. So I highly recommend you always write comments. It makes your code a lot easier to understand and a lot cleaner. So we can run this whole thing again. And what you'll notice is that it printed out the comment, but it didn't actually run that code. And so the takeaway here is that when you put a hashtag next to any text, it will be highlighted in green, and R will not actually run it, but it will not cause it to have an error. So that's important. So now let's take the next step and save some data. So let's just say how to save data. Let's take notes as we're going along. So the first thing we want to do is save a text. Saving text. It's very basic. And this line of code, if you now run it here, you'll notice that on the bottom, this ran and it turned blue, but nothing else really happened. But if you notice, actually, in the top right of RStudio Cloud, you'll notice that this has actually been saved now. And so this will show you in the top right all of our saved variables and data frames, as I mentioned before, or data. Everything that we're saving in RStudio will be in the top right. So just to quickly review, code is always written in this top left side. The code output always comes out on the bottom left. And everything you save in RStudio, generally speaking, will be up at the top right. So what can we do with this new string object? Well, if we actually just type in new string and then run it, you will see that it outputs this is a string. So that's exactly what we saved here. And this is just a simple example of how to save an object, and it will, I think, become a little bit clearer later why this is helpful to be able to save things like that. Let's move on to something a little bit more useful though, which is how to import Excel data. But before we do that, we actually need to get that data into our RStudio, which is hosted on the cloud. Now, getting your files, your data files into the cloud is actually relatively straightforward. You just click Upload here on the bottom right quadrant of RStudio. Um, just make sure that it's the Files tab. There's plots, packages, and some other tabs here that I will cover later on. But for now, you want to import files into RStudio Cloud with the Files tab and click on Upload. Now, you will just choose that file from your desktop or wherever it is located, and then it will upload. And this file we are actually going to be using is part of that GitHub folder, and you can just download it by clicking on the file, which is vote.csv, and then you're going to want to click on this raw here, and then you're going to want to save it by clicking Command or Control S, and then you can just save that to your desktop. And after that has been saved, you can just click on that upload button again, and then you will see that the vote.csv file is there, and then we can click upload. So now that it has been uploaded, as I show here on the left-hand side, that file will actually also be visible in our project workspace, which is in the bottom right-hand side. So now that that CSV file is on your computer, so to speak, it's on the cloud, we can actually import that into RStudio. So the function that you use to import CSV files is actually relatively straightforward. It's called read.csv. And within that, you will just type the name of the file. So let's just try to run it by either clicking the run button here or on an Apple computer, Command Return. And what you'll notice is that that file has now been read into RStudio. But the thing is that you'll see it's just been printed here down in the left-hand side, what's called the console. You didn't see anything pop up here. Nothing was saved. Okay, as we showed up here, when we save a file or when we save any text, you always want to type the name that you give that text or file, followed by an equal sign, and then the name of the file or the data itself. So if we wanted to actually save it, you can just see that all you have to do is type df equals. Now this df stands for data frame. Again, this is just the name that we're giving it. You can type in data, you can type in vote data, you can type in anything that you want within some restrictions, which I will talk about in a second. But let's run this df equals read.csv with the name of our file. And what you'll notice is that actually this successfully saved up here on the right side. Now let's run it again just to see what happens and see it a little bit more clearly. When you ran that line of code, it just has a blue line. So it looks like actually nothing happened if you were just looking at the bottom left of your screen. But if you look up here, you'll notice that that data has been saved. Now, one thing that is really nice about RStudio is that if you just click on this little tab here, this little sheet, you actually can also view the entire data set if you want. And so that's really nice because we can see the columns and the length and so on and so forth. Now, a lot of people have problems with not saving data by just typing this and printing, which will just print it off below. Remember, you have to type in a name and then have an equal sign. Now, you cannot have spaces between anything that you want to save. So you can't say df new. It has to be df underscore new or just df new or Now let's try to import some data that is not in the same folder as our RStudio code. And actually, let's just, while we're at it, save that piece of RStudio code to give you an idea of where this code is actually going to be saved. So as you can see here, the code is currently untitled. Let's give it a name. Let's save it, and TA1 code. And you'll see that that file now comes up right here in the bottom right side. Now, when you are telling the code to read some CSV files, it will only read the CSV files that are in the same exact folder. So if we had a folder that was named subfolder, and we put some data in there, as we are going to put in from the subfolder here on the GitHub, and we're just going to save that data by clicking on it, clicking raw, and then saving to our desktop. And then once that's been saved to our desktop, we are going to import it by uploading into the file folder that we want it to be uploaded in. So now that that data is in the subfolder, let's try to still use the read CSV function. And we can do that by typing in read CSV. And this time around, rather than typing just the name of the file, we will type both the name of the file and before it, the folder that it is in, followed by a slash. And so if you run this, you'll notice that it outputs at the bottom because I did not save it. So let's title it dfrs equals that, and then what you'll notice is that, again, it has been saved dfrs. If you wanted to, you can title it whatever you want. So try giving it a variety of titles. You'll notice that when you change the name, it will just add a different file. Now, that is how to read it from a subfolder, read files in from a subfolder. The last way you can read files in is directly from the GitHub. So actually, this is much more convenient than what I just showed you, where you downloaded the data in a number of steps. It's just much easier to actually download it from the URL. So you would do the same exact process as we did before by clicking on the file and then clicking raw. But this time around, you would copy and paste that URL from the data. And so that is just what I do here. So I type URL equals the name of that URL. So let's just save that first and see what happens. And what you'll notice is that it's actually been saved as a string, exactly how it was saved earlier when we had this new string. But this time, this URL object that we've just created here will be the URL. So let's just look at what that URL is. So if you want to type URL below after you've saved it, and you run it, what you'll notice is that it outputs that link. Now, when we want to save it, when we want to actually read that CSV file directly from the URL, all we have to do is type in the name of our file here on the left side, followed by an equal sign. And then we're typing the read CSV function, and in it, we're going to just put that URL. And when you save it, actually, let's just title it df GitHub, just to show a difference between the two. And what you'll notice is that it has, once again, downloaded the data. So that's the basics of how to download data. We're going to be downloading data a lot, and reading data a lot. So this is, if you're not completely familiar with it, we're going to be doing this every time, and I will go over how to upload the data. So please don't worry if that was a lot to intake at one time. But now I want to move on to the basics of the data frame. So what you'll notice here on the top right-hand side is that you have all these different data sets, which are called data frames, and there's different ways you can manipulate that using R. So one of the ways you can explore the data frame is by using what's called the head function. So you type head, and inside the head function you type in the name of the data frame. So we could type in any of these names, followed by the number of lines you would like to see. So what this does is shows you the first couple lines of that data set. So if you set it to 5, it would show you the first 5 lines, and so on and so forth. Try putting in the different data sets that we've created here into that head function and see if you see different results, and you should. So that is the head function. The next thing that I wanted to show you is the names function. And this will actually display the column names in your data set. So, sorry, my notes are not perfect here, but I want to also let you know, and I should have let you know earlier, that this data here on the left side is also available, as I had mentioned previously, I think, in the TA session folder under this code. And if it's easier for you, you can actually just copy and paste all of this code directly into our workspace here on the right hand side. I actually kind of want you to type it in yourself because I think it makes you think a little bit harder about what it is that you're typing in, and the comments, which are really important for you to organize your code. So let's just continue as is. The names functions, as I was mentioning, allows you to see the various column names of your data. And so you will just type in names, and then exactly like head, you will just put in the data frame that you want to see. But this time there's no 5 number, it's just the names of the data. And so what you will see down at the bottom is that these are the column names. And if you wanted to check that, you could just view the data frame here and then look at state, vote, income, it's all the same. Now, there's another function that I think is very helpful, and that is the summary statistics. And so you'll notice a theme here. It's just summary, and inside it you will put the name of the data frame. And you will see that you can have some summary statistics for each column. Now you might have noticed as well that I should have mentioned this, that when you click this little sweeper button here, it will get rid of the content here and just make it a little bit more clean. So feel free to use this if the output is getting a little bit confusing. Now we're going to go to 3.4, and this function is actually a little bit different because not only are you selecting the data frame, you are selecting a specific column within the data frame, as I show here. So if you want to select a specific column, you type in the name of the data frame, the $, and then the column name. So let's run the names function again. And what you'll see is that these are the names of the data frame. Now, if you type in the $, followed by the name of the column, what you'll notice is that these are the data for that column. So does that make sense? Well, let's look. df vote is a bunch of 1s and 0s, right? So that looks like it should be correct. If we typed in df followed by $, and state, what you'll notice is that there's a bunch of state abbreviations. So we can actually put that within a different function, which is called the mean function, and I'm sure you can guess what that does. It just calculates the mean. So we can't calculate the mean of a state, and that's why I just got an error right there, but we can calculate the mean of a category like age, because it's a bunch of numbers. And let's just run that again, and you'll see that the average age is 49 years old. So try putting in, say, income or education, or see what you get in there. We can just try income really quickly. The mean income, as you can see, is there. You can also do the same thing, but with standard deviation function, which is called SD, and in it you can put in some column data. So that is the basics of the basic functions in R. I think you'll notice that when you're using functions, that sounds really fancy, but all it is generally, it follows a similar pattern where it's the name of that function, so head, name, summary, or mean, and then you generally just put in some data inside, and sometimes you add some other specifications, like the number of lines. That is all that we will cover for today. We will cover these notes that you maybe see in my video below next week. I will transfer this over to a different note. And I just want to very briefly review what we did today. We found out that you write code in this top left panel here in RStudio. We found out that when we highlight that code and run it, that it will print down here in the bottom left in the console. We found that when we run code up here and save it using an equal sign and then a name that we give it, it will be saved up in the top right. If we name something, we can't have spaces, remember? And we can see in the bottom right all of the files that are in our current folder. So that includes this code file here that we saved. It includes data, and we can also upload files to this RStudio Cloud by the upload button. If you have any trouble following any of this, please feel free to reach out via email. Please attend my sessions on Monday from 12:30, or stop by for office hours. I think that this was a lot to cover, so if you don't have a great grasp of it yet, don't worry. We're going to be doing the same stuff over and over again, at least in terms of importing files and learning how to manipulate these data frames. We're going to be doing that throughout the whole semester, so it's stuff that you'll have a lot of practice on. And yes, other than that, the last point that I want to make is that if you don't want to copy and paste everything over bit by bit, you can always actually just look at the code in the folder. And if you want to just copy and paste all of this code that I've pre-written, you can copy and paste that over and then run it line by line. But as I said earlier, I think it's helpful to actually write the code or copy and paste it over yourself and write the comments, because it puts you in a good mindset to be able to do this without my help, I think. But in any case, looking forward to meeting you this semester and working together to understand R and how it can be applied to microeconomic data. See you next time.